All right, welcome to Black Swan Revelations. My name is Shane, and today we are going to be talking about why the Danites are missing from the book of Revelation. And we have to go back and do a little bit of a deep dive. So if you'll bear with me for a few hours, this might take a couple of videos, but we got to go back to the beginning in order to properly have a chance, at least, as to try and figure out why in the world are the Danites missing. Because this has stumped people for 2,000 years. And you can look at it from different angles. You could say it was because they were idolaters, that they were wicked, and that's why they weren't put in there. All kinds of stuff. So we got to go back. We have to absolutely go back to the beginning and then see if we could start piecing this stuff together. And then hopefully by the end of this little video series, hopefully we can have a better idea, at least maybe perhaps a better grounding, so that when we approach the Bible, we start looking at it, maybe we can look at it from a little bit of a different lens, and maybe this will help you get some insights, and then maybe you could share with me your thoughts as to why the tribe of Dan is missing from the book of Revelation. So I just want to say hi to everyone. Rob is in the house. Deidre, Enrique, Genesis is here. Who else? We have Bridal Ready. Hey, sis. How you doing? We also have Alan. Just a bird, not a plane. Just a bird, not a plane. Cool. All right, so let's just jump in here. Let's just see what we can come up with here. I'm just going to read a couple of these slides, and then if you have any questions as I go along, if something is like, I've never heard of that before, or this doesn't make any sense, Shane, can you slow down? Or even, I heard this stuff before. This is nothing new under the sun, Shane. Tell me something new. All right. So whatever you feel like putting in the comments, this is a good time to do it. All right. So missing Danites in Revelation. So in Revelation 7, out of the 144,000, the tribe of Dan is missing mysteriously. So if we go way back to Genesis 49, 16, 18, we see Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Nothing crazy here, because we've seen this before. The reason why I brought this up is this is going to come up again and again. So I wanted to present this first. Again, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels. Remember that, so that his rider shall fall backward. And I will put, so we're going now back to the very beginning. Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. So we're talking about two seeds here. It shall bruise thy head. That seed, the seed here will bruise thy head, or you can say crush thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel, meaning the serpent seed will bruise his heel in reference to Christ, and the bruise thy head will be Christ from this seed will bruise or crush the head of the serpent. And I think that's pretty straightforward. Cool. Nothing really to see here, Shane. This is basic 101. I know this stuff, Shane. All right. So the serpent is a heel biter. He bites from below the heel. Again, back to this. Shall bruise thy heel, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So if you're attacking the heel, you got to come at it from below. Again, seems pretty straightforward. Under the heel or boot. Under the boot. Again, not too crazy. This is what we call, this is the first prophecy of Jesus. Did I miss? Yeah, this is the first prophecy of Jesus, Genesis 3:15. You can almost say the first gospel, if you will. The first good news. God tells the serpent, Satan, it shall bruise thy head, meaning the seed, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Your seed shall bruise his heel. This is called proto-evangelium. Big word. A little parched today for some reason. This is the first gospel, predicting that Jesus, the seed of the woman, would crush Satan, but Satan would strike his heel. So far, so good. Are we all cool? How you doing? Who's in the house here? Nancy. Jestastica. Like Fantastica. And Stephanie's here. Awesome. All right, so continuing on. So far, so good. Strike his heel. So Satan would strike his heel, and this is where, when we mention this, we're talking about obviously the crucifixion. So this is predicting seed of the woman would crush Satan, but Satan would strike his heel. The heel bite represents a temporary wound, but the head crushing is ultimate victory. Again, back to Genesis 3:16. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. So what does Dan's name mean? If we're going to be talking about why is Dan removed from the book of Revelation, what does his name even mean, Shane? What's the big deal here? Well, Dan means judge or one who judges. D is also the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. N is the 14th letter. D represents Dalet or door, doorway, pathway, entryway. N is the 14th letter for Nun, and this stands for fish or seed. Fish or seed. Kind of interesting, right? N. That's N. Can't make this stuff up, folks. So D represents Dalet or door, doorway, pathway. Okay. One interesting note. There is I kind of wish Derek was here because he speaks Hebrew. There are two N's in the Hebrew alphabet. There's the regular N or middle N, and there's also the final N. The regular or middle N is used somewhere in the word. The final end, the final end is used only at the end of a word. Pretty straightforward, right? Anytime you see regular N or middle N, it's used somewhere in the word, maybe at the front, in the middle somewhere. But the final N is always used at the end of the word. Jesus arrived in the year of our Lord, or began his ministry, I should say, the Old Testament or BC, and then we have the New Testament AD. Jesus basically arrives in the middle. Before he was on earth, that's where we have the Old Testament, and then now we're living in the New Testament. So BC AD, again, pretty straightforward. The final end arrives in the end, or the latter days. So now we have the word Dan. And the reason why I mentioned the D and the N is because in Hebrew there are no vowels. It's just consonants. So really, if you're looking at the letter or the word Dan, it's DN. So it could be DEN, DUN, DAN, DON. N. Any one of those. So remember, there's no vowels. So when you have the word Dan, there's no vowels, there's no sound, which means it's undetectable. Doorway to the end. Final none. That's Dan. Jesus is the seed, or N. Regular N, middle N. Jesus came mid-history. Seed that he's the seed that dies, and he's the seed that rises again. Jesus mentions this in John 12:24. A grain of wheat, seed that must fall to bring to life. So a seed has to die in order to come to life. This is Jesus himself saying this. So Jesus is the true righteous nun. The final nun, or the serpent, extends downward. So the letter N actually goes straight down. And this also represents, and the final nun actually represents a serpent, which is interesting. If you have the regular N or the middle N, you're now talking about seed or something that grows. All that kind of stuff is regular N. Final N is referred to a serpent, and that extends the downward. And I put in brackets perhaps to the pit, signifying Antichrist. So in Nehemiah 9:27, therefore thou deliverest them into the land of their enemies who vexed them, and in the time of their trouble, when they cried unto thee, thou heardest them from heaven, and according to thy manifold mercies, thou gavest them saviors. So this is Nehemiah talking about the book of Judges, the time frame of Judges, where God heard them cry. Who's the they? Who's the them? It's the Israelites crying when they first entered into the promised land. They weren't able to conquer all these nations. So every time they would do their thing, and then they would cry out whenever a nation would try and take them out. And they would cry, and then God gave them a savior. Deborah, Gideon, Samson, ring a bell? Remember, Samson's from the tribe of Dan as well. So these are called saviors. We also call them judges. This is where we get the book of Judges. You could almost say the book of saviors, who saved them out of the hand of their enemy. Could Dan's name reflect early on an anti-savior, anti-Christ type figure? Jesus came to save. We know that there's someone coming in the latter days that is going to mimic Jesus Christ, but he's not him. So he would be classified as an anti-savior. Obadiah 1:1:1, in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon him, Jerusalem, even thou wast one of them. What's going on here? Well, Obadiah is saying to Edom, Jacob's twin brother, because they have a brotherly covenant, that you stood on the other side of the Jordan in the day that the strangers carried away the captives. So this is in the day that the Babylonians came and carried away the Israelites, the remaining tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and arguably some of the Levites. So he's condemning what Edom did. They broke the brotherly covenant, and instead what they would do is they would wait to the Babylonians would take these people out of their home, and then they would go and raid their home. It was brutal. They'd steal everything and bring it back. Or they would capture the Israelites, whoever was remaining, and they would take them to Babylon and sell them for a pair of shoes or perhaps a prostitute, and then go back home and then raid their house. So Edom was highly condemned for this. So Dan's prophecy now, Genesis 49:17, Dan shall be a serpent by the way and an adder. The reason why I wanted to bring that up to you is to show you that God condemns when people don't help Israel when they were down and out. Instead, they were laughing and they were skipping for joy because destruction was falling upon Israel. So I brought that up because that was Edom. That was Esau, the Edomites. So now I want you to be able to tie this in with Dan, because Dan is going to do something similar a little bit later. So Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path. This is like you can say it's like a horned serpent that biteth the horse's heel, the horse heels. That's what he does. That's what he's known for. That's his DNA. That's what he's made up. This is what he likes to do, is he likes to strike the horse's heels. Interesting, not the rider. It strikes the horse's heel. Horse heels. So that his rider shall fall backward. So person falls off the horse. Now Dan can take him out. Joshua 18:1, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation there. This is when Joshua just finished conquering all the land, got rid of 31 kings, and now they're all gathering together and they're like, give me the land, give me the land, give me. So they gathered together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation there, and the land was subdued before them. And there remained among the children of Israel 7 tribes, which had not yet received their inheritance. So there's still 7 to go. Amazing, right? That means only, according to my math, 5 got their land. Reuben, Gad, half tribe of Manasseh, Judah, and Benjamin. That's it. Joshua said unto the children of Israel, how long are ye slack to go to possess the land, which the Lord God of your fathers hath given you? So that you got the land. This is almost like a condemnation, if you will. He's coming down hard on the 7 remaining tribes. He's saying, look, why are you guys so lazy? Like, what are you waiting for? God has given you this land. Go, take it. It's yours. And they're not doing it. So give out from among you 3 men for each tribe, and I will send them, and they shall rise and go through the land and describe it according to the inheritance of them, and they shall come again to me. So what's he telling them to do? He's telling them, I need you to pick 3 people, 3 from each tribe, 21 people altogether. And I need you to go out into the land and sketch it out in a book. Write it all down in a book. Take good notes, and then come back and show me which land you're interested in. Which area would you like between the 7 of you, and we'll divvy it up amongst the 7 of you. That's what Josh is telling them to do, including the tribe of Dan. Verse 6, ye shall therefore describe the land into 7 parts, and bring the description hither to me, that I might cast lots for you here and before the Lord our God. And casting lots is basically, once they get the description from all the pieces of land, Lot is going to have a look at these 7 tribes and go, it makes the most sense that you get this one and you get this one. Perhaps they did a bit of a vote, but that's what casting lots are. Casting lots are making a decision based on the evidence that's presented to you. It's not rolling dice. I don't know where people get that idea that it's casting lots is rolling dice. Do you know where we get the idea of casting lots from? Well, it comes back from Lot. Abraham said to Lot, look at the land, see what seems good to you. If you go this way to the right, I will go to the left. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. Make a decision, Lot, and I'm good with whatever decision you make. That's casting lots. Weighing the evidence. You have a bunch of disciples and you're like, Lord, help us pick which disciple would fit this based on the fact that they were with us from the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So they determined that there were 2. They're like, oh, look, these 2 guys, for sure, they were both there. Matthias and I think, was it Judas? Another Judas? Forget the other guy's name. But then they picked, I think it was Matthias that they picked. They said, this guy, this is the one. So they voted. They had a vote between the 11 disciples and said, hey, we got to replace this betrayer Judas, which he deserves what he got, and we need to replace him. So let's have a vote. Who do you think was around the most out of these two guys? And you could say the lot that they cast would be like, you know what? Here's my right in front of this guy, and I pick him. So they counted out 6 votes for this guy, 5 votes for you. Winner. Chicken dinner. That's how they did it. So here, you shall therefore describe the land into 7 parts. Bring the description hither to me, that I may cast lots for you here before the Lord our God. And the men arose and went away, and Joshua charged them that went to describe the land, saying, Go and walk through the land and describe it, and come again to me, that I may here cast lots for you before the Lord in Shiloh. And the men went and passed through the land and described it by cities into 7 parts in a book, and came again to Joshua to the host at Shiloh. And the 7th lot came out. So I'm fast forwarding here. The 7th lot, the last lot, came out for the tribe of the children of Dan, according to their families. Dan got the leftovers. They all described it, whatever, and then they took a vote and they said, you 6, here's all your land scattered. And then Dan got basically what it looks like. Here's the leftovers. How do we know this? Because we know the coast of their inheritance is Zorah, Eshtaol, and Irshemish, and Shalaben, and Ajalon, and Jethlah, and Elon. That's kind of interesting, especially when we're talking about Elon Musk and Donald Trump, that this is in the land of the Philistines. This is the area that the Danites are going to get. Shematha and Ekron. Ekron shows up quite a bit. And Ekla, Gibbethon, Balath, Jehud, Benabarak, Gathrim, Mejerkon, Rakon, and the border before Japhel, or I think you can say Joppa. The coast of the children of Dan went out were too little for them. So Joshua did a vote, basically said, here, Dan, this is your land. So then they went out and they looked around. They're like, we don't like this land. It's too small for us. We are a big, mighty nation. We're a mighty tribe. This is not good for us at all. We need some more elbow space. We need some more room. So then the children of Dan went up to fight, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it talks about specifically what they did. But in this chapter, we get a snapshot right away of what happened. They basically went to this land and took it over and renamed it Dan. But then later we'll see what happens, how they did it. So therefore, the children of Dan went up to fight against Leshem and took it. So Joshua wasn't arguing with him. He wasn't saying, no, this is your land forever. He just said, look, we're guessing based on the description that you gave us that here, this makes sense. This is the land you get right here along the coast. So they went and they're like, yeah, no, this is too small for us. So they went up to fight against Leshem and took it, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and possessed it, and dwelt therein, and called Leshem Dan, after the name of their father. So this is important, because this is what the Danites were known for. We'll probably talk about this in another video, but the idea, as we start to learn about how they operate, what their MO is, they conquer land, and they inject their name into the land. So this is the inheritance of the tribes of the children of Dan, according to their families, these cities with their villages. Judges 134, and the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain. So now they're getting some struggle. So this is like right into Judges. So we have the end of Joshua. Joshua's giving out all the land. And now we get into the first chapter of Judges. And the Amorites are pushing the Danites into the mountains for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. So the Danites are in a little bit of a pickle. They can't come down from the mountain. But the Amorites would dwell in Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Shalbim. Yet the hand of the house of Joseph prevailed, so that they became tributaries. So whenever the Amorites attacked Joseph's tribe, Ephraim, just north of Judah, they would capture the Amorites, and make them tributaries. Judges 2. And an angel of the Lord, this is why, again, when Paul talks about in Galatians, he says the law was mediated by angels. This is what we're talking about here. Angels come down and tell Israel from time to time, look, you guys are going off. You're not sticking with the plan. And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you to go up to Egypt, and I have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. That was the deal. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this? And if you kind of skip through this because you're like, oh man, Judges is so boring, or Joshua, and you just want to get to the book of Acts or maybe the book of Ruth or whatever, this is important to note that they actually were making leagues. They were actually making peace deals with the inhabitants of this land, saying, we won't attack you if you don't attack us, all this stuff. And instead of tearing down their altars, they started to inquire about what kind of gods that they were worshiping. And so they started to have an interest in the gods that were in Canaan from all 7 of the nations. But ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this? And it came to pass, when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel. So now we get an idea that all of them have not done what they were supposed to do, that the people lifted up their voice and wept. Now they're going to get serious. Now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. Namely, the 5 lords of the Philistines, which we know caused a lot of trouble for King David and basically the Israelites, and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians, come back to that, and the Hivites that dwelt in Mount Lebanon. So these are all coastal regions, mostly, that they're having issues with. From Mount Baal Hermon, that's interesting, Hermon, unto the entering of Hamath. And they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So Moses told them, look, this is what you guys are to do, and they didn't do it, so now they're being tested because they're not very good at war. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, and Amorites, and Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites, and they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. We are only in chapter 1 of Judges at this portion here, what we're reading, and now we're forced to reckon with the concept that Israel didn't obey God. Let me come back here to the main screen, and then we'll go through some questions and I'll continue. But this is important. We're at the beginning of Judges. The Israelites are intermingling, going against the grain of what Moses said to them. He said, don't do it. Don't mingle with other nations, especially with the nations in the land that you are to conquer. So they didn't listen to Moses, and they're intermingling. And it's not just they're giving their wives to the Canaanites, to the Hivites, to the Girgashites and all the Shites, but they're also giving their sons. They're also allowing their sons to take daughters from Canaan, from the Philistines. They're mixing with the Philistines. They're mixing with the Hivites. They're mixing with all 7 nations that they were supposed to kick out. And this is after Joshua gives them the land. Says, go get them, Tiger. And they're mixing. If you miss this, you're going to come at it and you're going to go, well, Israel today is genetically they're 100% Israel because they live in that land. And right out of the gate, you could see they're mixing men and women. So now you get a little bit of mixture, DNA mixing, Canaanites, Hivites, the works. There's no separating here. There's no separation. And an angel comes down of the Lord and says, what are you doing? This is not what Moses taught you guys, and you're not doing it. And they all cried. It almost looked like they didn't want to stop. They just cried. They didn't even say sorry. It was just like, oh man, we're in trouble. But they didn't stop. And we know this was the pattern all through the book of Judges. They do their own thing. They worship their own gods. They sacrifice their own children. They give their daughters to the Canaanites. They give their sons marry Canaanite women. And they burn their children to the fire. All through Judges. And they cry out and they're like, I don't get it. How come we're in trouble here? What's going on? And then God would send them judges to help them out. It's interesting, right? Like right out of the gate, they're mixing. They're mixing everything. So if they're doing it in the promised land, they're already mixing with tribes and everything. And you have a diaspora, where the Syrians come in and capture 10 tribes and they assimilate. And then you get the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites, and they get carried off to Babylon. And after 70 years, the Levites have a difficult time reconciling their genealogy after 70 years. And we're 2,000 years removed, arguably go back to 1948. And you're going to tell me they understand their DNA inside and out when God said that Joseph doesn't even know who he is? Now we have to start moving away from the idea of genetics, that Israel is 100%, their DNA is 100% from the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, like the people today that are living there. If it was, my whole point is that if it was difficult back then and they're intermarrying, how are you going to prove unless you know directly? And it seems like Ezra had to keep records of everyone, and it was very tough. The only one that he could really keep a good track of was Jesus Christ, the descendants of David, because we see in Chronicles that they actually follow more of David's lineage. It was preserved. Why? Because of that seed, Jesus Christ. Everything else is all mixed. It's crazy, right? All right. So let us go back and let's continue, because I think this starts getting interesting here. Not that it wasn't interesting before. And they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to their sons and served their gods. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and forgot the Lord their God and served Balaam in the groves. So let's go back, or let's go ahead to Revelation 2. Unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write, These things saith the Son of God, who hath his eyes like unto a flame and fire, and his feet are like unto fine brass. I know thy works and charity and service and faith and thy patience and thy works, and the last to be more than the first. Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed to idols. So this is what this Jezebel type person is doing. Look at this. Little note on the Sidonians. The Sidonians, or Zidonians, were a powerful seafaring people from the Phoenician coastal cities of Sidon and Tyre, located along the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Their maritime influence extended across the ancient world as they were skilled sailors. I'm talking about the Sidonians now, traders and shipbuilders. This is what they were good at. They were pro seamanship, pro sailors. Through their extensive naval expeditions, the Sidonians and their Phoenician counterparts established trade routes spanning from Canaan to Cyprus to Greece to Crete to North Africa and even as far as Spain. Their ships carried luxury goods like purple dye from the Murex shells, cedar wood, glass, and fine textiles, making them one of the most influential economic powers of their time. So now let's go back to Judges. And the reason why I bring that up is because, again, the Sidonians lived just north of Dan before they left, and then also just south of Dan were the Philistines. They're being gently squeezed. So Judges 5:17, Gilead abode beyond Jordan. And why did Dan, this is Deborah saying this. She just finished having a battle. She wrote a song. She's like, Gilead abode beyond Jordan, so on the other side of Jordan. And why did Dan remain in the ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. So this is kind of interesting now, because now we have Deborah getting involved and saying, why did Dan stay in his ships? Why didn't he help us? Remember, I mentioned earlier that the Edomites didn't want to help Israel. They turned a blind eye, and in fact, they captured some of them and took them to Babylon and sold them for prostitutes or for a pair of shoes. So now we get Dan doing the same thing, except they're staying in their ships. They're focusing more at what's out at sea than they are coming back to land and help the Israelites. As in, it almost seems like they don't care about Israel anymore at this time. And we're early in Judges. So Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. Why was Deborah mad at the Danites? That's the big question. It's because they didn't join the fight when the tribes of Israel were called to battle against Sisera and Jabin, the king of Canaan. The Danites refused to participate. And Jabin, if you go all the way back through the nation, or the table of nations, you could say these were almost Greeks. They stayed in their ships instead of fighting alongside their fellow Israelites. Dan remained in their ships, likely engaged in trade or seafaring activities along the Mediterranean coast. Lack of commitment. This suggests that the Danites were more focused on commerce and the maritime trade than helping their brethren in war, because they're still trying to get their land, and it looks like the Danites don't even care. Similar to how the tribe of Asher stayed along the coast instead of joining the battle. So Asher did no better. Little side note. We have evidence that the Danite territory was affected by the Philistines. Dan's allotted land was near the Philistine territory. As we see in Joshua 19:40-46, the tribe of Dan received a region in the central coastal plain, including Zorah and all the names, Ekron, Joppa, which border the Philistine-controlled lands. And this is important. The Philistines were expanding into this region and had strongholds in Ekron Ashdod, Gath, remember that place where Goliath came from, Ashkelon, and Gaza. These are strongholds for the Philistines. The Philistines oppressed Israel constantly, including Dan. Judges 13 states, "And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years." They were given into the hands of the Philistines. This oppression affected Dan directly, as Samson, a Danite, was raised up as a judge to fight the Philistines. This is Judges 13 to 16. So Dan is now immediately affected by this aggression by the Philistines. But Dan struggles to hold its land. Judges 1, back to Judges 1:34. "And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley." And this suggests that Dan was being squeezed from both sides. The Amorites in the hills and the Philistines along the coastal plain. As a result, many Danites abandoned their inheritance and migrated north to conquer Laish, and you could argue that they actually fled by boats and went out into the Mediterranean Sea and said, "I'm out of here. I don't need this hassle. I'm being squeezed by the Philistines and I'm being pushed out of my land by the Amorites. It's much easier to just go out to sea." So a little about Samson. Samson's trickster nature, and this is important if we're talking about Antichrist down the road and the Danites and all this kind of stuff. I'm trying to build a case that perhaps after all this that we go through, that the Antichrist could come from the tribe of Dan. So we're building this up. So the riddle at his wedding. So Judges 14:12 to 14. Samson proposed a riddle to the Philistines at his wedding feast. Which is interesting, right? Talking about a wedding. "Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness." Judges 14:14. His trick with the foxes, after the Philistines took his wife and gave her to another man. This is what he did. Samson caught 300 foxes by their tails, tied them tail to tail with torches, and torched the place. Burn all the Philistine fields. And it's interesting that in the media, you'll get certain countries that say we need to level where Gaza is, because this is where Gaza is located, in where the Philistines are here. And it's interesting that Samson, a Danite from the tribe of Dan, caught 300 foxes and torched the place, burnt the land. It's like, yeah, just get to level this place. This was a clever act of sabotage using both strategy and mischief. So Dan is associated with ambush, judgment, and causing a downfall. He's a trickster or a wild card, meaning he's unpredictable. Side note, the sea serpent legacy. After World War II, NATO called the Soviet submarines red serpents during the Cold War. The idea of hidden underwater predator being a serpent that strikes without warning became a common theme in naval warfare. U-boats as sea serpents. U-boats. In German, it's Unterseeboots. We're literally undersea boats, striking from below like a hidden serpent. The Allies often referred to U-boats as sea wolves or sea serpents because of their stealth and deadly ambush tactics. I'm not saying Germany or Russia is the tribe of Dan. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that it's interesting that Germany and Russia used these boats, U-boats, undersea boots, to ambush the Allies, and they would have no problem taking out defenseless ships. They didn't go after battleships. They went after convoys, where there were ships that were transporting goods from one country to another, and they would take them out with their magnetic torpedoes. The serpent biter are torpedoes that the German U-boats used in World War II. They used magnetic torpedoes that detonated underneath ships where the hull was the weakest. U-boat, undersea boot, under the boat, under the boot or heel. It's interesting, right? So instead of a direct hit on the side, these torpedoes bit from below, causing catastrophic damage and sinking ships quickly. And back to Dan. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. And when these ships would get hit from below, they would just go up and they would sink almost instantaneously. And a lot of people would abandon ships as well, almost like a rider fleeing off of his horse. So you have, just like Dan's serpent ambushes from below, the German U-boats attacked from beneath the water, causing ships to fall. Allies countered using depth charges to crush the sea serpents. So they would launch a depth charge and it would crush these submarines. So back to Dan. Isn't it interesting? We see here in Judges 5:17, Gilead abode beyond Jordan, and why did Dan remain in ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. So this is our first glimpse that Dan is not interested in helping Israel, and this is a betrayal to say the least. This is also our first glimpse that Dan is more interested in seamanship. The tribe of Dan seems to be more focused on ships, the sea, and independence, rather than being fully committed to Israel's land battles. So it's interesting, this theme of Dan being independent, being rebellious, being I can't be told what to do, comes up over and over again with regards to the tribe of Dan. This is unusual because most of the other tribes were land-based warriors or farmers. Dan's maritime interests add to their mysterious and rebellious reputation in the Bible. So now we find out a little bit more about the Danites and what they were like. So Leviticus 24:10-16 says, and the son of an Israelitish woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel. And this son of the Israelitish woman and a man of Israel strove together in the camp. So the son of this woman fought with another guy in the camp. And the Israelitish woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed, and they brought him unto Moses. And his mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri, of the tribe of Dan. So now we get this son who is okay with the idea, even though he's a Danite. His father is an Egyptian, mother is an Israelite. He's okay with the idea of blaspheming the name of God inside an Israelite camp. He's okay with that. So now they bring him to Moses. What do we do? He opened his mouth to blaspheme against God, against his. Oh, and this is Revelation. This is eerily similar. So if we're talking about the tribe of Dan being okay with blaspheming the name of the Lord, we see in Revelation 13:6, and he opened his mouth to blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Well, who is this? This is the Antichrist. Again, I'm trying to build a case that the Antichrist comes from the tribe of Dan. This guy has no problem blaspheming the name of the Lord, just like the Danite tribe. Back to Leviticus 24:16. And he that blasphemeth the name of the Lord, he shall surely be put to death. and all the congregation shall certainly stone him, as well as the stranger, as he that is born in the land, when he blasphemes the name of the Lord, shall be put to death. So anybody that blasphemes the name of the Lord, it was stoning. So now we get into the tribe of Dan and their idolatry. Judges 18:30-31. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, this is interesting, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. And they set them up Micah's grave image, which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. So what's going on here? This is important because Dan was so influential as a tribe that he convinced the grandson or great-grandson of Moses himself. This is Jonathan. This is Moses' grandson. Imagine being 3 generations removed from the humblest man, the greatest man arguably in the history of the Old Testament, Moses. This grandson became a priest for hire and actually went with Dan until they got captured by the Assyrians. That's, to me, this is jaw-dropping that after 2-3 generations, you see the grandson of Moses follow Dan. This is who Micah had a priest, because this priest was hanging around Judah, and he followed Micah. Micah said, hey, come be a priest with me, one-on-one. You could be my priest, and this is great. And I have an idol and all this kind of stuff. And Jonathan's like, yeah, no problem. And then we see later what happens to how Jonathan becomes intertwined with the Danites. So imagine having the grandson of Moses as your priest when you go forth and conquer. You're going to be pretty confident. What kind of confidence do you think you would have, or the Danites? From this, we see that Dan was pretty much an idol worshiper from the start. So Judges 18:7. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish and saw the people that were therein, how they dwelt careless, after the manner of the Sidonians. Remember the Sidonians that we just talked about on the coastal regions? So these group, they're too far away now from the Sidonians to help them out. So when they're saying they're careless, they're like, they don't care about defenses. That's what they're talking about here. The 5 people from Dan went, look at these guys. They don't even care about warfare. They have no weapons. They're all unarmed. They're just relaxed. They're all in peace. That's how Dan was approaching. And they started to evolve into the idea that it's actually better to attack a country, a nation, a tribe, a village, a city that is unarmed than it is to go toe-to-toe with some of the best cavalry in the world or the best fighters in the world. That's not our MO anymore. It's way more profitable to go after a people that are defenseless, and they don't even care about getting arms. They don't care about protection. This is like God himself sending us a miracle. We're so excited that we can attack these defenseless people. This is the crazy mindset that they have with the tribe of Dan. So they dwell careless after the manner of the Zidonians, quiet and secure, and there was no magistrate in the land that might put them to shame. No one to say, hey, you need to build some walls. You need to kind of keep an eye out for invaders. You guys are living life too large here. You're too relaxed. There's no one to put them to shame in anything. And they were far from the Zidonians and had no business with any man. They were isolated. They had no protection. They had no treaties with any other nation. They were open. Kind of feels like Canada in some way. We're like a careless nation that we basically have almost no army, which is interesting. And you have the states saying, we want you to be our 51st state. How do you feel about that? It's like, we have no weapons. What can we do? It's crazy, right? This group of people, they are unarmed. The Danites scout Laish and see that the people are peaceful, unarmed, and vulnerable. And we'll see this later in Ezekiel. We won't talk about it today, but we'll see the Antichrist shows up to attack Jerusalem when they are at peace, when they have no weapons. And the surrounding nations say to the Antichrist, why are you attacking now? These people are peaceful. If you're looking at a common thread, that mirrors how the Danites are. They think this way. We need to attack nations that are at peace. The phrase quiet and secure suggests that they lived, these are the Sidonians, without fear or of attack. They had no worry that they would ever be attacked, unaware of the coming destruction. Judges 18, 9 and 10. They said, arise that we may go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And are ye still? Meaning, guys, this is like the greatest opportunity. We get to slaughter a whole bunch of people. And why are you sitting here while I'm talking to you? As I'm saying this, you should be getting your swords on, and we should be already walking. Like, why are you just sitting here looking at me? Let's go. Be not slothful to go, and enter in to possess the land. When ye go, ye shall come unto a people secure, and to a large land. Secure as in they are so confident that nobody's going to invade them. They might even come up to you and shake your hand and say, hey, welcome to our land. Can we get you lunch, dinner, whatever? They're like, that's how you're going to know that you're in the right place at the right time. And to a large land, lots of land, lots of resources. And this is something, again, that gets into the DNA of the Canaanites, or the Danites, is the idea that they're peaceful, but they're looking past them going, holy smokes, look at all the wheat, gold, silver, vibranium. Probably don't have vibranium, but they're looking around going, this is amazing. They have so much minerals and resources for us, and they're just here. It's just for us, for the taking. Let's go get them. It's eerily similar that Donald Trump, again, not saying that he's part of this. I'm just saying it's interesting that when you read the Bible, you hear Donald Trump say things like, I want Greenland, which was owned by Denmark. Okay. I think Canada should be the 51st state. Okay. We're kind of a peaceful nation here. Why are you saying this stuff? Why are you wanting us to become part of your country? And now you're going after Ukraine saying, if we help you, we want your minerals. We want your resources. We feel you owe us now because we've given you so much money, and Europe, we're pulling out and all this kind of stuff. So that's the tone that Trump is having right now towards the world, is like, hey, do this. And then he looks over here. I need this. I need that. Oh, and you have resources. Let me take those too. That's very Danite thinking. Not saying he's from the tribe of Danite. I'm just saying that that's how these guys thought. They're looking for resources. And look at this. When ye go, ye shall come into a people secure, and to a large land, for God hath given it into your hands. So the Danites are off the belief, going, God has given us this land for us. Go take it. They're unarmed. Go get them. Go get them, Tagger. A place where there is no want of anything that is in the earth. Look at this. For God hath given it into your hands. This is a place where there is no want of anything that is in the earth. This is the best land. We're not going to have any needs. They have all the resources that we need. It's beautiful. The Danites justify their attack by saying God has given them the land, but there's no record of God commanding this invasion. They exploit the weakness of the people instead of engaging in fair battle. That's their style. And they took the things which Micah had made, and the priests which he had, and came to Laish, unto a people that were quiet and secure, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and they burnt the city with fire. That's the DNA, that's their MO, is to attack a village that is unarmed and to torch it, to burn it down. That's what Samson did. There's this fetish with burning things down, burning buildings, watching it burn while women and children scream. That's the Danites. They do this kind of thing. There was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no business with any man. They had no deals, no treaties, nothing. They were isolated, and they thought it was okay to be isolated until it wasn't. They had no business with any man, as in, you can almost think of it this way, is like, it's none of our business what's going on in any other land. We're to ourselves. We do our thing, you guys do your thing, and we're good. We're peaceful. They had no business with any man, and it was in the valley that lieth by Beth Rehob, and they built a city and dwelt therein. They slaughtered the entire city and burnt it down. The people had no defenders, and Dan showed no mercy. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born unto Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the Lord. So they set up a place where they can worship idols in Dan. And isn't it interesting? The first Israelite king after the split of Israel set up a golden calf in the capital, one of the capitals of Israel, which would be Dan back then. Because when I say capital, I'm talking about these guys are really good at worshiping idols. They're second to none. So they put a golden calf there, Jeroboam, and then he put a golden calf in Bethel, and he said, here, these are your gods that brought you out of Egypt. And Dan was okay with that. It's like, yeah, this makes total sense. We have the grandson of Moses. He's going to help us out anyway. And he's going to help us know how to worship a God the right way. Just like Aaron told them what to do and molded a golden calf for them. He showed them. He had no problem showing Israel how to worship a golden calf. So this is what's going on here. Until the day of the captivity of the land. So this is the history of Dan right here in one or two verses. They don't change. They don't come back from this. They don't switch gears and all of a sudden go, oh yeah, we made a mistake. We should be worshiping Jehovah God. No, because they had these priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. They're toast. They're toast. And maybe, just maybe, this could be one of the reasons why they are not in the 144,000. Instead of honoring God, Dan establishes an idolatrous worship system. This false religion remains in Dan for generations, setting the stage for blasphemy against God. So we're going to leave it for now because we're going to talk about the Vikings tomorrow. We're going to talk about the similarities between these Vikings and the Danites. but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a snapshot as to, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Bible in regards to the Danites and in regards to the end times. And we're going to get closer. We're going to get closer to trying to figure this out. Why are they out? Why are they not listed as one of the 144,000, one tribe out of the 12 tribes? Like, why aren't they part of the 144,000 sealed? And I think it's going to be a little bit more obvious as we move along. But I think this is a good place to start to digest. Maybe you might have to go back and write down some of these verses or rewatch the video or something at your leisure, because maybe you're at work and some of this might just go, what did he just say? Because I've been busy working, whatever it is. But if you have any questions in regards to what I said or some insights or something, this would be a good time to mention it. I'm just going to go through some of your questions, if there is any. Let's see here. I do suspect that these stories seem to paint he was a sodomite, could be propaganda. God did what he wanted concerning the publisher. I think you're talking about King James or something. I don't know how we got on that, but that's okay. The Vikings in Denmark, the Danes also worship idols like Thor. Yep, we'll be talking about that. Let's see here. Also, views will give the so-called believers money. 10,000 views gives $100. Don't know what's going on there. Let's see here. Any questions? The genealogy confused me, but were the Danites part of the children of Israel and branched off? They are a part of the 12 tribes. They're I believe he was the fifth son, the first of Bilhah, which is one of the four wives of Jacob. He has Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah, I believe. So four of them. So Rachel was barren, and so she gave Jacob to be his wife, Bilhah, and Bilhah had Dan and another person. I forget the other guy's name. Asher? Not sure. But Leah had 6 kids, 6 of them. The first 4 were Reuben, Simeon, Judah, or Levi and Judah. And then we see Dan. So it's kind of interesting that, yes, he is one of the 12 tribes. But I find it very strange that Jacob actually prophesies over him, saying, you're going to be an adder in the pathway. You're going to strike at the horse's heel, and you're going to cause the rider to fall backward. It's very, very end time-ish, the wording in that. Yeah, I get it with the genealogy chart, but man, it gets blurry real quick because you start seeing people intermarrying with everybody under the sun, and all of a sudden you're like, well, it's basically how they recognize themselves as being a part of a tribe and where they live and all this kind of stuff after a while. Because the genealogies, it's not like they carry their birth certificate with them wherever they go, especially when they get deported by the Assyrians. They get assimilated. So it's not like they're carrying the Torah with them, because for a few hundred years at least, they rejected the Torah. When we're talking about the 10 northern tribes, and arguably you could say the same thing for the tribe of Judah. They lost the law of Moses. And they lost basically, for sure, the Torah. You could say they lost the Old Testament, but most of it wasn't written yet. But for sure the Torah, until Josiah found it through a priest. A priest came across it and said, hey, look at this, and read it. And then they all tore their clothes because they were like, how did we lose the Torah for a long time? That's Judah. Imagine 10 tribes that get dispersed into Europe and Asia and all over the place, and they don't have a Bible that they can carry with them. They just get assimilated and they forget about it. And they don't forget, they didn't want to worship God. That's why they got kicked out. It's not like, oh, Lord, help us. We're being transported out of another country. We want to worship you. They're not doing that at all, at least not the 10 northern tribes. They're being vanquished or kicked out of the land because they're not keeping the Sabbaths. They're not following the Bible, the Torah. They're not listening to the priests. They're not following any of the commandments of God. And they're getting kicked out, and they're being captured by the Assyrians and displaced for thousands of years, mixed, because they were okay in the book of Judges to marry Canaanites. You don't think they're going to be okay with the idea of being in Italy somewhere for 1,000 years, mixing with all the nations there? You don't think they're okay with that? Suddenly they're like, oh no, we got to make sure that we're pure, when they never did it in the promised land. So that's why Paul says, don't get hung up in genealogy, because as Christians, we are the children of Abraham. You probably didn't realize that as a Christian. You're probably like, no, we can't be the children of Abraham. And I promise you that we are the children of Abraham. Why? Because we are from Christ. We are in Christ. When you believe in Jesus Christ, you are now the children of Abraham. You are born again. Your DNA matches up with Abraham, matches up with Isaac. How do we know that? Well, Isaac was born of a promise. The promise was fashioned into the womb of Sarah and created Isaac. It was pretty cool. When Abraham was like 100 years old or something, he had a child for the first time. And that child was because of a promise. It wasn't because of the law. It was because of a promise that God said that this time next year, you're going to have a child. And it was credited to Abraham because he believed. He believed. And we as Christians enter into that same exact faith that Abraham had, because we believe the promises of that seed, which is Christ. And we're born again. So now we are the children of Abraham. Thank you for that, Nathaniel. I appreciate that. And arguably, we could say we are a Jew on the inside. What? What are you saying? Are you saying replacement theory? I'm saying true Israel is spiritual, meaning you have to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, is the King of the universe. There's no other way to the Father but through Christ. And once you get that, you are in to the kingdom of God. You are part of the New Jerusalem. You're part of spiritual Israel. If you reject Christ, you can't get in. That's how it works. It goes all the way back to Abraham. Because if you start getting into DNA, you're going to get confused real quick. You're going to say, but those living in Israel today, they're the descendants of Abraham. So what about the Ishmaelites? They're descendants of Abraham. So are the Edomites. They're descendants of Jacob, of Isaac. It's the promise. That's where the DNA comes from. That's the promise. Because Jesus is the last Adam. Adam, the first Adam, is earthy. He's from the earth. He fell, took of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, and our flesh is part of that DNA. But when you're born again, you get new DNA, which is in Christ. He gives us a new heavenly body. This is why we ache and we moan and we groan, because we want the redemption of our new glorified bodies, our heavenly bodies that Jesus Christ himself designed for us. And it's from the template of the second Adam, which is Christ. So once you understand that, we are actually a big deal in God's eyes. but not because of what we did, because of what Christ did on the cross. And once you understand that, I'm telling you, the Bible starts opening up to you and you start going, oh, like obviously you're not going to understand everything. I don't understand everything about the Bible, but I do know who I am in Christ, and no one can take that away from me. Nobody can come up to me and say, I'm more special than you are, Shane, when it comes to what Christ did on the cross. I have a seat in heavenly places right now, and that is a big deal to me. I am a joint heir in Christ. It doesn't get any better than that. There's nothing better in the universe that you can get than to be a joint heir in Christ. Do you know what a joint heir means? It means you get everything. It's all yours. Everything Christ has, he gave to us. Calls us brothers, calls us friends, and allows us to go right into the throne room of where his Father is. That is a beautiful thing, and I don't take that lightly. This is something that we get just for believing that Jesus Christ died on the cross, rose again on the third day, and is alive forevermore. He will never be killed again. This is our new genealogy, our new DNA. It's from heaven. And once you understand that, you're born, once you understand the idea of being born again, the whole world opens up to you. You're like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, we're actually a big deal to Christ. Yeah, that's why he died for you. You're a big deal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died for you. While you're yet sinners, he died. Isn't that interesting? All right, let's see here. What else do we have? Any questions? Anything else? Let's see here. Believe in Jesus, but you don't believe the words of the Bible, which we have been given, written word about. Am I missing something? Let's see here. About Jesus loved us, died for us, our Savior did the most amazing. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And again, if you go back to genealogy, you could say, okay, say a Jew comes up to you and says, look, I get it. We don't want anything to do with Jesus Christ. We don't want anything to do with your New Testament, but we are descendants of Abraham. So we belong. And Paul says that not just because you're children of, you call yourself a child, doesn't mean you're part of the promise. The promise came through Isaac, and the promise came through Jacob, because God took that away, the idea that you can use genealogy to make you righteous. That's not how it works. Because if it was, then Ishmael should have got all an inheritance. Instead, he got cast out. Esau had the same parents, father and mother, Isaac and Rebekah. He didn't get the promise. He didn't get the inheritance. Jacob did, not Esau. So if you're going off of genetics, you're in trouble, because Jacob and Esau were twins. They even look the same, minus some hair here and there. So now you're going to have to go, oh man, there's two twins here, and I'm part of the DNA. I'm chosen and all this stuff. And it's like, well, hang on here. The promise came through Isaac. Isaac was that promise. And then through Jacob. The genealogy gets crazy after a while. And then you start thinking, oh, hang on here. One of the 12 spies actually married Rahab. And then out of her, she became the great ancestor of King David. And Ruth was a Moabite. So are you saying you're from the Moabites? The Ammonites? Like, after a while, you start seeing that Israel is really, really mixed. They're like a Heinz 57 after a while. Look at Joseph. His wife was from Egypt. Moses' wife was from Ethiopia. Abraham wasn't even born in Israel. He might have a tough time getting into Israel today. Because if they look at his papers, it'll be like, papers, please. Where are you born? Syria. You're not welcome here. You cannot live here. You're not an Israelite because you have to be born. You're not an Israeli. You have to be born after 1948. And we actually go after your mother's side. Who's your mother? I don't know. It's like we don't know who Abraham's mother is. Now you're in trouble. If you go off of genealogy, you're in trouble real fast. So much mixing going on. It's crazy, right? Let's see here. What else do we got here? Netherlands, a weapon of providence of Zeeland, has Jewish roots. For sure, I would argue that it was. When you say Jewish, I think you have to kind of narrow it down a little bit, because to me, Jewish is if you practice, you practice reading the Talmud. You have a rabbi over you. You live close to a synagogue. All this kind of stuff. You practice everything that they practice. That's what makes you a Jew. Because otherwise, people can't just call yourself a Jew. Because you live in Canada. Oh yeah, I'm a Jew. What makes you a Jew? Well, I don't know. I just called myself that. It's not the way it works. You have to actually practice Judaism. If you want to be an Israeli, you have to have your mother born in Israel, and you have to practice Judaism, technically. And you have to give up your citizenship in Canada or the US or wherever you're from in order to live in Israel. And this is probably why guys like Ben Shapiro will never move to Israel, because he would have to give up his U.S. citizenship, which means a big deal to him because he lives in America. So what else do we got going on here? God name me fully, and if you trust, you wouldn't be asking me questions. Okay. Any questions here? Let's see, and then we'll wrap this up here. Just deal by yourself seems right to you. Sorry, guys. I'm a little interested in engaging David in here. Oh, I think these guys are having an argument with each other. Sometimes people will kind of bicker amongst each other. I'm just asking anyone if you have any comments in regards to what we were talking about today. Revelation truth. People say they're ready for it, but when you tell them the truth, they try to doubt what you're saying. Let's see. I think that's it. I don't think anybody has any crazy good questions. Let's see here. What does this guy say? Thanks, Stephanie. The DNA tells you that you're a Jew. DNA never lies. That's interesting. I don't think you're allowed to do DNA tests in Israel today. I think it's actually forbidden. Somebody could correct me on that, but I think I saw somewhere that you're not allowed to do DNA tests. Why? Because they're Heinz 57. They're mixed from all over the world. So good luck trying to figure out which tribe you're from. Only God knows. So good luck. Let's see here. What else do we have? All right. I think that's it for today. Tomorrow we're going to continue. We'll try and finish this. Get closer to figuring out why the tribe of Dan is missing from the book of Revelation. Hopefully we're getting closer. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in another video. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day.